At what age were you when you noticed that something was not functioning as it should?
Started really young, and I did not know that it could be related to thyroid. No amount of exercise and dieting is working. I mean, I have tried every diet out there, and they work temporarily, and then I just gained all the weight back, and I didn't really understand physiology. I didn't understand how the thyroid impacted all of that.
Just kind of give us a deep dive on the thyroid and its function as a whole.
So if the thyroid function is low, many women experience the inability to lose weight. Upwards of 98% of women who have low thyroid actually have an underlying autoimmune condition. That's why they have a low thyroid. Their thyroid just didn't stop working. That's why this is not like a menopausal thing. This is more of an autoimmune issue.
And we are live. Dr. Heather Stone, how are you today?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. I'm excited to be chatting with you because I get so many questions about thyroid health, hormone health. I mean, I've had several guests on lately talking about HRT, TRT as it pertains to improving longevity, improving performance, just optimizing health overall. But it seems as though there's a void in the communication around thyroid health specifically. So I'm excited to see what I can learn from you today. Before we start, though, I mean, what even got you interested in this line of work? Like, what was the catalyst for you going down the path of optimizing thyroid function?
Yeah, so I think with like a lot of healthcare practitioners, it starts with a personal story. And, for me, I was having all the typical thyroid symptoms. I couldn't lose weight. I had, hormonal imbalances. I was tired. I just did not feel like myself. And, I went down this path where doctors continue to tell me that nothing was wrong. And I'm like, something is definitely wrong. And they would also tell me that, oh, by the way, your hormones are out of balance, but you'll just need fertility treatment when you're ready to have kids. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is not the path I'm going down. So I had to figure out, what I needed to do to change this because I was not going to live like that. And so once I figured it out for myself, I was like, oh my gosh, there are millions of women who are struggling with low thyroid. And even though they're on medication and they have a diagnosis, they're still struggling with all these symptoms, and it really just isn't necessary. So that's kind of what I dedicated my life to do, and really to the mission is to change the face of healthcare.
At what age were you when you noticed that something was not functioning as it should? Like, was there like a pretty stark line in the sand of like, okay, this is not right, this is not how it's supposed to be? Like, what were the telltale signs for you personally?
Well, I think it started really young, and I did not know that it could be related to thyroid. But even in my teenage years, my hormones were always a mess, and I was struggling with weight gain about 18, 19, 20 years old. And then that's when I started, probably 2021 is when I started to go to a doctor because I was like, no amount of exercise and dieting is working. I mean, I have tried every diet out there, and, they work temporarily, and then, I just gained all the weight back, and I didn't really understand physiology. I didn't understand how the thyroid impacted all of that. So it started for me very young, but I did not realize that it was all connected, our hormones, our thyroid function, our metabolism, until I really started to understand what to do to fix the issues. But at the end of the day, you always have to get down to the root cause of the underlying imbalance, because a lot of people think a lot of people think when we're looking at our health that everything works in a vacuum or everything works separately. Like, the thyroid does not work separate or by itself. It doesn't work. It works together with your immune system and your insulin and other hormone production and your liver and your gut. So everything works together. And I think it's really important that, because we get stuck in this model where everything is blamed on the thyroid, that's why people struggle so much, is because they're only looking at the thyroid. Or like you said earlier, they look at other hormones, but they're not looking at the whole picture.
Yeah, totally, 100%. What was the messaging like from the doctors initially when you were going in to see what the issue was, when you were trying to get some advice? Like, what was their general messaging? Was it totally generic and related to the calories in, calories out model? Or what were they pointing the finger at?
So, and I am grateful for this experience, because this is what made me realize that what they were telling me was not true. But I went in and they said, okay, your thyroid is totally fine. There's nothing wrong with your thyroid. And I think that you don't have a menstrual cycle because you exercise too much. And I was like, what? Like I knew because, that back then that was pre-Google. So we didn't have Dr. Google that we could go consult, but I was in pre-med, I was reading textbooks, and I knew that when a woman's body fat goes below 10%, that she will lose her menstrual cycle. I was 50 pounds overweight. So I knew that what he was telling me was absolutely not, the reasoning that he gave me was not right at all. And he did not address the whole weight loss issue. And then he said, oh, by the way, when you're ready to have babies, come back and we'll give you fertility treatment. And I'm like, this is the craziest advice I've ever seen. And I just paid him for that advice. And I was like, but I am grateful because of what he said, I knew it wasn't true. And so I said, all right, I have to figure this out because I am not going to go down this path.
And what age were you then? Do you remember?
I was about 19 or 20, 21, somewhere around that age.
Wow. So they were suggesting at that point your lack of a regular cycle was because you were exercising too much, and they were already recommending IVF or something crazy like that.
And let me tell you, I was not exercising too much. Like I would walk and I would do cardio for an hour, like 3 to 4 times a week. I wasn't some professional athlete. So what they were saying just did not make sense whatsoever. And when I was younger, when my hormone cycles were a mess, they just put me on birth control. And that is typically what happens. So they don't look to see why your hormones are out of balance, like what's causing this issue. Instead, they override the physiology and put you on hormone replacement, essentially with birth control. And that should just fix the problem until you're ready to have kids. And then you're supposed to get off of it and expect the body to function and be fertile.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I had a podcast, I guess about a week now. We were talking about just my frustrations with the birth control model, because you go in there and they don't talk anything about the lasting effects of that hormone. I mean, which is totally foreign to the body from that level of input. Depending on the type of contraceptive, if it's like an IUD, that's a foreign object in the body. They don't talk about any of this stuff. They just say, yeah, put this in, and then as soon as you're ready to have kids, take it out and you'll be golden. But just total. I mean, there was somebody that was getting a birth control pill prescribed after they had gotten through menopausal years, just to simply help with some of the symptoms. And it's just like, that's common. That's not a horror story. That's, it happens so frequently and people don't recognize it.
Yeah, and I think it's important to understand. I mean, we could literally talk an hour about birth control and how we are really mismanaging and misunderstanding hormone health across the board. But they don't tell you that you're at risk for ovarian cancer and uterine cancer and breast cancer. And that doesn't go away when you get off of the pill. Like you would think that your risk for those cancers goes away when you get off, but it actually doesn't. But I don't recall ever hearing that when I was being prescribed birth control pills. And I think that, most women are never told that and don't even understand that. And we really are just overriding the body's underlying imbalances and physiology to try to make those hormones somewhat imbalanced. But in the big scheme of things, it doesn't really work that way.
Yeah, totally agree. Everything that we're looking at is not, you can't view it through the lens of it being in a vacuum, like, especially with hormones. Like you pull one lever and 10 other levers get pulled by default.
Exactly.
As it pertains to the thyroid, can you just do like a deep dive on, we'll just go super basic and then we'll get deeper and deeper, but what is the thyroid? What is its primary function in the body? How does it manipulate metabolism? Like just kind of give us a deep dive on the thyroid and its function as a whole.
Yes, perfect. So the thyroid is a butterfly-shaped gland that kind of sits at the base of your neck. All right. So the thyroid mostly makes T4 hormone. And then the body has to convert that T4 hormone into T3 hormone, which is the active form of thyroid hormone. That's what your body can use. Now, the thyroid hormone in general is responsible for regulating your metabolic rate, right? Or your metabolism, right? So how fast your metabolism works or how slow your metabolism works is usually regulated by thyroid hormones, specifically T3. Now, the thyroid is pretty cool, or the thyroid hormones, and they're so important. There is a receptor site on every single cell in the body from your head to your toe to receive thyroid hormone. And that's why when our thyroid hormones go down, that we can have a whole host of symptoms. So if the thyroid function is low, many women experience the inability to lose weight or weight gain. They have trouble sleeping, whether it's falling asleep or staying asleep. They may have issues with depression and anxiety both at the same time, which sometimes it's hard to understand how someone can be depressed and anxious, but it happens. They have issues with their hair falling out, their nails being thin, their skin being dry, extremely low energy, and brain fog. And so it's like, how can one tiny gland or one hormone have all of those effects? It's because it truly affects from your head to your toe. And it's really the reason it's because it regulates your metabolic rate. And I think one of the things and the biggest fallacies that we have with understanding thyroid health is that most thyroid hormone physiology happens outside of the thyroid. Because your body makes mostly T4, and women who've been diagnosed with low thyroid, they're looking at one marker only. Now, we can go into all of these little things and go deeper, but when they're looking at one marker only, they're typically only looking at TSH. And that stands for thyroid stimulating hormone. And that's actually not even made by the thyroid. It's made by the pituitary. So your pituitary, a small gland inside of your brain, tells the thyroid when and how much thyroid hormone to make. And so most of the time, they're just looking at the TSH and prescribing medication based on if that's high or low. And they're not looking at all of the other thyroid physiology that goes outside of the thyroid gland. And there's more than 22 different patterns of thyroid physiology imbalances that we can see. And most of the time, women who are diagnosed with low thyroid are really just prescribed a T4 hormone and kind of shushed out the door. Now, men do have thyroid issues as well, but it's just much more common in women. But men can have low thyroid.
In a perfectly healthy individual that's natural, not taking any thyroid medication or, HRT of any form, what can one expect thyroid function to look like as time goes on? Like, how is thyroid function impacted in a healthy individual without, all the external factors naturally? What would one expect to see there?
Well, are you asking me what does it look like if somebody is functioning with a great healthy thyroid? Because you should maintain thyroid health all the way through life. It's not normal that the thyroid moves into hypothyroid or low thyroid function, but you should easily be able to maintain your physiology, right? You should maintain your body composition. Weight should not be a struggle all the time. And you should have good energy. You should sleep well. You should have regulated hormones. That's what it should look like whenever you have a healthy thyroid metabolism and function.
So thyroid function should operate at normal capacity, healthy capacity, independent of menopausal years, for instance. It's not like testosterone, whereas when you go through menopause, that drops off a cliff for females.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we don't have these big fluctuations and transitions through different stages in our lives, right? So thyroid function should be maintained all the way through the entire lifespan.
What is the difference between thyroid function between male and female? Is there significant shift there? Is that pretty even keel throughout both?
It's pretty much even kill throughout both. There really isn't a lot of differences between male and female thyroid physiology. Now, there's a lot of different physiology that goes on between men and women, which makes it, it impacts thyroid function in women differently than men. For example, the most common cause of low thyroid is an autoimmune condition called Hashimoto's. And this is where your immune system makes antibodies to tag the thyroid tissue for destruction. So about upwards of 98% of women who have low thyroid actually have an underlying autoimmune condition. That's why they have a low thyroid. Their thyroid just didn't stop working. That's why this is not like a menopausal thing. This is more of an autoimmune issue. Now, these autoimmune diseases typically turn on with big hormonal fluctuations. All right. So we see Hashimoto's turn on when women go through puberty. We see it especially at the highest rate after women have babies. And then again, you see either it turn on or an exacerbation of symptoms as women go through menopause. So you do see different different thyroid physiology as we go through these phases, and the thyroid is impacted by our other hormonal fluctuations, and mostly it's because the immune system is impacted by estrogen and testosterone surges. So women are going to be at a higher risk for developing Hashimoto's, and therefore there's going to be a higher occurrence of low thyroid in women. But men also do get low thyroid, and they can have Hashimoto's, and the most common times that I see this turn on in men is after they've gone through a major stressful event. Right. So, I've treated many male patients, but it's after like a death or a bankruptcy or some major life event where it really tips the scales and the immune system starts to attack the thyroid.
Gotcha. So are there many issues in which case the thyroid itself is the primary driver for these conditions, or is it more so the thyroid is what is negatively impacted as a result of these underlying root causes, and then it's just manifesting itself in metabolic disruption?
Yeah. So the first thing that happens is the immune system starts attacking the thyroid. That's the first thing that happens. So most of the time, it is not a primary thyroid issue. It is an autoimmune disease. And this autoimmune condition turns on, and it can be there for weeks, months, years before you ever get diagnosed with low thyroid. And this is one of the frustrations with many people, is that they have every symptom of low thyroid, but they go to the doctor and the doctor keeps telling them that their thyroid hormones look fine. Like there's nothing wrong, but they're like, I have every thyroid symptom in the book. And so they just wait until the immune system has attacked the thyroid enough to where they actually have low thyroid hormone, and then they give them thyroid medication. All right. So this is a primary autoimmune issue. And then secondarily, we develop hypothyroid. This is in most cases. Now, certainly there are some people who have primary hypothyroid, but for the most part, that is a small percentage. Most people who have have low thyroid actually have Hashimoto's. And so then if you take we got to look for the solution, like why is this a problem and what do you do to fix it? So Hashimoto's is kind of at the top. It's the highest priority. So it's an autoimmune condition. So now you have to ask a deeper question. What's causing the immune system to attack the thyroid? Now, this is a very important question because when you have one autoimmune disease, you're at risk for developing multiple autoimmune diseases. And in particular, with Hashimoto's, you're at risk for developing thyroid cancer. So it's really important to get the immune system stable and to handle what's causing the immune system to attack the thyroid so that you don't start to get all these other autoimmune diseases or thyroid cancer. Now, when we're looking to understand what's causing the thyroid, there's the immune attack on the thyroid, there's some pretty standard underlying triggers that many of us are dealing with. Now, we're not usually dealing with all of them, but we are dealing with a few of them. So one is insulin resistance. Every time we have an insulin surge, it will cause the immune system to attack the thyroid. So that's when we eat bread, pasta, rice, potatoes, cookies, cakes, candy, soda, or if we don't eat enough or we're fasting for too long, that will cause an insulin surge. So not only does it make the immune system attack the thyroid, But when we have insulin surges, that's one of the only hormones that is for fat storage. All right. So it's we get stuck in these bidirectional feed forward pathways where it's like we're trying to focus on the thyroid, but we're ignoring insulin resistance and our blood sugar. And the crazy thing is insulin resistance has almost the exact same symptoms as low thyroid. So you have to handle both of them. You have to handle both of them. Otherwise, you're going to feel like you're chasing your tail, and you're not going to get anywhere. And this is one of the reasons when people take thyroid medication and they don't fix these underlying issues, especially insulin resistance, they don't get anywhere. Like they may feel good for a short period of time, but because they didn't fix the insulin resistance, they still have all the same symptoms. And then they feel like, nothing ever works and they don't really understand what's going on with the root cause.
Yeah.
Now, I can go through
like
some more of those triggers. Go ahead, but you can interject here.
Yeah, no, definitely. Let's go through all the triggers for sure. But if we're trying to avoid the unnecessary insulin spikes and improve insulin sensitivity and not be chronically dieting, it sounds like a pretty good argument for following a relatively low carb approach at a maintenance or slight surplus intake from time to time, as opposed to just eating a bunch of carbs and eating too little far too often.
Exactly. You're right on. And for me personally, and even for my patients, we kind of shift between more of a paleo into a keto, with some circadian fasting and then kind of back and forth, so that you're not always in ketosis, you're not always in, a deficit, but you kind of fluctuate back and forth, and you have to make that a lifestyle. But in order to stop this vicious cycle, we have to pay attention to our blood sugar and our insulin. And it has been really eye-opening to me. I started using continuous glucose monitors with my patients and myself, and it is amazing to see how the body is actually responding and how much some of these foods impact your blood sugar. Like I have been doing this for, more than 2 decades, almost 2.5 decades. And I know that when you eat corn and you drink a margarita, your blood sugar is going to go up. But I had a continuous glucose monitor on and I just wanted to see like what it would do. And my blood sugar went over 200 and I couldn't believe it. I'm not diabetic. My blood sugar is good. But I was like, oh my God, I knew it was going to go up, but I thought maybe 160, maybe 170, but I had no earthly idea that it was going to go over 200. And for me, I was like, wow. The book knowledge is important. The clinical experience is important, but seeing that on a glucometer for myself personally, I'm like, wow, that margarita was terrible. It wasn't even that good. It is definitely not worth it. So that was pretty eye-opening. And I don't think it's been eye-opening for patients, because when you can see what it's actually doing to your physiology, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the CGMs. I'm not diabetic either, but I've worn one on multiple occasions. And I feel like I'm really in tune with my body through the different preps that I've done. So I know how certain things are going to affect me. And I've been keto for forever. So my CGM data is pretty boring. But a lot of people that are not familiar with tracking macros, or they're not in tune with their body, having something tangible to look at and see how a food that they would previously think would be a non-issue massively causes a blood sugar spike, I think that makes it real for them. And I feel like it empowers them. So I'm a huge fan of it. There's been some doctors that, naysay against CGMs if you're not diabetic. But I think, the more data people have, the more empowered they'll feel.
For sure. And it was eye-opening for me because I knew drinking a margarita wasn't good, but I didn't realize the impact that had. And I think we get stuck in, a little bit is okay. And we get stuck in, on the weekends, I'm not going to be as strict as I am during the weekday. And it's like you blow your whole week because on the weekends, you cheat, but you don't realize the impact that those things are having. So it makes it much easier. And I think that, doctors that may not like CGMs unless you're diabetic, I feel like they don't understand the impact of insulin resistance and the lead up to the actual diabetes. But there may be a different approach to reverse that and to optimize physiology versus you'll deal with it when you have a problem.
Totally agree. Totally agree. I got another question that's maybe taking us down a tangent here, but I'm curious. So when you're doing paleo and then transitioning your patients to keto as it pertains to their circadian rhythms, are you having them in more of a deficit during their keto phase, or are you having them at a surplus while keto as well?
Well, I'll say this. When I take patients, usually I go through the paleo phase in the beginning because it's an easier transition. So like if you take people who are used to eating McDonald's and Taco Bell and they just have a terrible diet, moving them into paleo is going to put them in a deficit because it is really hard to overeat proteins and vegetables. I mean, you could certainly do it, but from where the typical patient is coming from, they're going to be in a bigger deficit than where they started. So then, and getting them used to cooking this way and making different choices and getting them used to consuming whole foods and changing their mindset is a much easier transition than going straight keto. And so I like to start there, and many patients do exceptional. And some of them, I don't even have to really move into ketosis, but the ones who really struggle with their weight and maybe they came to me and they were already eating low carb or they tried low carb and they didn't get, a lot of traction there. We start to work on all their underlying physiology and working on moving into insulin, working on their blood sugar, and then moving into ketosis. And when when I have them go into ketosis in the beginning, we're not counting calories that much because, from where they came from, and if you're eating mostly animal protein and green vegetables, it's really hard to be in a surplus. I mean, it is really hard. Now, you could certainly overdo it. The other day, I was eating macadamia nuts. And I looked at the bag and there's 2,000 calories in a bag of macadamia nuts. And I don't even want to tell you how much fat is in there. And I'm not really worried about the fat and I wasn't too much worried about calories. But when you can eat half a bag of macadamia nuts sitting here as you're sitting all day in between patients, I was like, this is crazy. So, trying to pay attention to what you are eating, because you can certainly go over if you're not looking at things appropriately. But moving people that are really struggling with weight and insulin resistance, moving them into ketosis, and then maybe doing circadian fasting, where we start with no eating 3 hours before bed, and then moving into maybe skipping dinner a couple of times a week, and then seeing how their blood sugar responds and seeing how they're doing with their goals.
Yeah, no, I can totally respect all of that. I feel like a lot of people, you got to make it easy for them from where they're coming from. You got to meet them where they're at. So totally agree with everything you just said. There's been a few people that say that keto long-term it causes implications with thyroid health. But I feel like in that context, it's always been from people that are just chronically in a deficit. I feel like if you ate at a higher intake from time to time, that would remove any issues for thyroid misfunction following a strict ketogenic approach. I think people just diet far too long, far too frequently, and that's what causes the issues.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that they do it sometimes in the wrong times of day. So there's a lot and I'm guilty of this too. I was intermittent fasting kind of when that first started kind of coming out, and intermittent fasting in the morning, when you don't eat in the morning, it really impacts your thyroid health, your cortisol levels, and your blood sugar. For me personally, when I was intermittent fasting, I loved it because I didn't have to eat. I could fast a lot, which is not great because that means your metabolism isn't necessarily where you want it. But I check my numbers all the time, right? I get my blood work done. I'm looking at my A1C and my thyroid and all of that. And I was doing really hard intermittent fasting, and I was in about ketosis. My ketones were probably anywhere from 2 to 3, which is pretty high, but it wasn't terrible. After about 3 months of that solid, I went and got my labs done, and my A1C was pre-diabetic. And I was like, what in the world is happening? And so this was before continuous glucose monitors. So I was checking my blood sugar every 30 minutes in the morning. And I noticed that my blood sugar was fine when I woke up at, under 100. And then by 10 o'clock, it was at like 110. And then by 11 o'clock, it was at 120. And by 1 o'clock, it was over 120. And so my body couldn't handle that type of intermittent fasting. For me, it was not good. And I did not see that it was great for my patients. So if you shift it to mimic your circadian rhythm, because when you wake up in the morning, you're going to get a cortisol spike. And if you're not eating, you're going to get an insulin surge as well. And it's really hard on the body because that's when the body needs most of its energy is first thing in the morning. And then cortisol starts to go down when you're trying to sleep at night and everything is moving into a different direction. So I found it's much easier on the body and we get better results when we do more fasting at night versus first thing in the morning.
Yeah. So now you got to switch from late night margaritas to mid morning mimosas, right?
Something like that, or no margaritas
Something
would
like
be better.
Yeah.
But I am
probably
finding that when I go out to dinner with my husband, I'm like, what time do they open? 5 o'clock. Okay, we'll go 5 o'clock. And then that way I can eat early. So we're eating like with all the old people, but that's okay.
Yeah, it is crazy how. There you go. I mean, sympathetic state has a massive impact on hormone function, thyroid health as well. And like, I just get so frustrated seeing people fasting can be great. It can certainly be a tool, intermittent fasting and extended fasting as well. But when it got really popular, I guess probably like 2020, 21, I feel like it just blew up. And you had so many people just taking it to the extreme with, more days not eating than eating throughout the course of a week. And that's not necessarily natural in our current day and age either. I mean, you can make an argument from an ancestral standpoint that, there were definitely periods of time where we were doing extended fasting, but, people can certainly overdo it, and that's going to wreak havoc hormonally speaking. I think there's a yin yang to everything. Like there's a benefit to eating and feasting. If you're going to have a fast, you have to also feast, and people just seem to forget that feasting component of it.
Yeah, and then other people forget the fasting. I will say this, having a continuous glucose monitor has really helped me because I now can do a 72-hour fast and feel amazing, and my blood sugar is very stable, so it's more of an extended fast. I haven't really had patients do this yet. I mean, because as long as they're doing well with what we're doing and it's not like an extended fast, then I'm going to let them continue to do that. But there's some patients that certainly you could do that. But I've learned that a 72-hour fast, like once a month for me, is great. And then, as long as I will continue to be in and out of ketosis, that's where my body functions the best. I feel the best, and it seems to work physiologically.
Yeah, totally. So what are some other primary drivers? So we got the Hashimoto's. What are some other triggers that you see people dealing with from an autoimmune standpoint that are then wreaking havoc on the thyroid downstream?
Yeah. So blood sugar is number one. Number two is what you were talking about, your adrenal glands and stress levels. And so we get stuck in sympathetic overdrive where the body is always feeling like it's under threat. It's always under stress. And so that is going to, first of all, drive the immune system to attack the thyroid. Secondly, because you don't go into parasympathetic where your body rests, digests, and heals. So then you've got sleeping issues. Your circadian rhythm is dysregulated. Circadian rhythm, for those that don't know, is that this is your sleep and wake cycle. And it is regulated by your adrenal glands and the production of cortisol. It's also regulated by melatonin and serotonin. But an oversimplification is that your adrenal glands produce cortisol in the morning, and that should be your highest peak in the day. That's when you should wake up. Pretty much when the sun comes up, you should feel great. You should have energy. And then cortisol slowly decreases throughout the day so that it's preparing you for sleep at night. And then it should stay low throughout the night and then peak again in the morning. But a lot of times, because we're in overdrive, we have high cortisol levels, which makes us gain weight around the midsection, and no amount of exercise is going to fix that. Cortisol is also impacted by insulin and your blood sugar. And so many people don't sleep at night because their blood sugar crashes, and then the adrenal glands secrete cortisol, and then you're awake. and then you can't go to sleep for another 2 hours. And so when our sleep and wake cycles are disrupted, we decrease the amount of time that we're healing. Our digestion gets slowed down, so we get constipated. And your adrenal glands are really important for really your brain health as well. So adrenal function is important. And also, it's also important for people to know that it's normal to have a cortisol spike in the morning and then it comes down at night. And sometimes people have such prolonged high cortisol that eventually the adrenal glands can no longer respond to stress in the way that it should. And this is when we start to get all these chronic degenerative diseases, and it's highly tied to your blood sugar. So if you have a blood sugar issue, like especially pre-diabetes, you know you're going to have an adrenal issue because your adrenal glands help balance blood sugar. And then you look at estrogen surges, testosterone surges. Those will also trigger the immune system to attack the thyroid, along with low thyroid hormones. So if you have low T3 or T4, that can be a trigger for the immune system to attack the thyroid. So a lot of women get frustrated that they've been prescribed these thyroid medications and they're not working, meaning like they don't feel any different. So they just stop taking the thyroid medication, which actually just keeps this vicious cycle going. So one of the biggest fallacies is that women think that when they take their thyroid hormones, all is going to be well. And the reason they think that is because that's what they're told. And so they take the thyroid medication or the thyroid hormone and they don't lose weight and they don't have any extra energy and they still have the symptoms. And that's because some of these other underlying issues haven't been addressed. So when you start to fix the hormones and your blood sugar and your cortisol, and you also have to look at underlying infections, whether it's bacterial, yeast, fungus, viral, parasitic infections will be a trigger for the immune system. You have food sensitivities that also trigger the immune system. And then you have to look at gut health as well. So those are pretty much all the triggers. Now, nobody has just one. Most people don't have all of them, but many people have, I would say, probably like four or five of them.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving targets. People got to get dialed in. How do you recommend people take action and figure out what their body specifically needs? Like if they've got, a healthy amount of stress, if they're actually prioritizing sleep, getting good quality sleep, if they're not drinking energy drinks all day long, over caffeinating, if they're eating good quality foods, I'm assuming the best path for people to take is to actually get some labs drawn, see what their markers are looking like, see where they have deficiencies, and then adjust from there.
Yeah, exactly. So I have a thyroid transformation blueprint. And the first pillar is that we have to have goals, right? We have to have a constant pursuit of our goals. So what is our health goals? What is it that we're willing to do? What are we trying to do? And make sure that those goals are solid and that you have motivations for why you want to achieve those goals. That's what helps keep you moving forward. And I think a lot of people think that health is always on an upward trajectory, but it's kind of like up and down. As long as we're moving in the right direction and we're heading towards health, that's the progress that you should expect. Now, the next thing is you have to have comprehensive testing. So as it pertains to thyroid, when you go to your doctor and you say, I have all of these symptoms and I think I have low thyroid, because now we have Dr. Google, he or she will say, okay, let's check your thyroid. And most of the time they just check a TSH. If they're lucky, they may do a T4, maybe a thyroid panel, which includes a T4, a T3 uptake, and an FTI. Now, there are actually 12 different markers that make up a full thyroid panel. And you can't just look at the thyroid. You've got to look at your blood sugar, and you've got to look at infections, and you've got to look at your gut, and you've got to look at inflammatory markers, like all those things that we talked about. That is what comprehensive testing looks like. A lot of people, if they've heard me talk or they've checked with Dr. Google, there's many different markers outside of just that TSH, and they think that that's comprehensive testing. Well, that's looking at the thyroid in a more comprehensive way, but remember, the thyroid doesn't work work in a vacuum. So you have to truly test all of those different underlying triggers to figure out, okay, which ones am I dealing with? Which ones are the most priority? And that's what I'm going to start working on. It's, when we take thyroid supplements or thyroid medication and we don't feel great, we stop taking that. And then we say, okay, maybe it's a blood sugar issue. And then we start working on that, but we're not working on what's causing blood sugar issues, because most of us think that what causes us to have a blood sugar issue is our food. And food does impact it. But if you have an underlying infection, it's going to raise your blood sugar. If you have a high toxic load, it's going to impact your blood sugar. There are actually toxins that are called diabetogens that sit on top of insulin receptor sites. And if you're dealing with a high toxic load, you can have the most perfect diet and your weight's not going to move. And you wonder why is this not working for me? It's because there's other things that are causing your blood sugar issue, or other things that are causing the symptoms that you're dealing with. So you have to have full comprehensive testing. And then the next pillar is that you have to have a comprehensive analysis and diagnosis. So I just got off a call with someone right before this podcast. He was a spouse of a patient, and he said, I'm totally healthy. I'm doing really great. I just need to lose weight. And I'm like, oh, he's like, I've looked at my labs and my iron was high, so I'm going to go donate blood, but everything else looks good. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. So I go through his labs, and his insulin is outside of the lab range. His cholesterol is high. His triglycerides are high. He's got a UTI. He's got an underlying viral pattern. He's like, yeah, I took it to my doctor, and he said, everything is looking great. And I said, okay, you're on metformin. You're on a statin. You're on a Zepbound, which is, a GLP-1 agonist. I'm like, okay, so the difference of health, what you're thinking of as healthy, and you're just saying that you're not sick. That doesn't mean that you're over here in optimal health. And I think that that's really important, because most of the time in traditional medicine, when they're looking at your labs, they're looking to diagnose a disease that they can give you a medication for. They're not looking, are you functioning in an optimal way? Are you in complete optimal health? And most of the time, if we have a symptom, that's not the case, because the way your body communicates with you is that if there's an underlying imbalance that it can't overcome, then it's going to give you a symptom. And it's our job to figure out, okay, where is that symptom coming from? What is this underlying imbalance that's creating this issue? And once you resolve that underlying imbalance, then the symptom goes away because it no longer has a purpose. And so really getting someone who understands what goals you have. Are your goals to reach optimal health, or are your goals just to suppress symptoms and slow down the progression of a disease? So if your goals are to achieve optimal health and truly get down to the root cause, you have to have someone who's trained and understands how to look at things like that, not just to diagnose disease and give you a medication. So that is really important. And then from there, only from there can you customize treatment plans, because I think a lot of people, they go from symptom to treatment. And when you go from symptom to treatment, you're guessing. And that's when we go into our health food stores and we say, I really think I've got an adrenal issue, so give me an adrenal supplement. I think I must have a liver issue, so let me take a detox supplements. And maybe it's a blood sugar thing, so they take cinnamon. But if you're not getting down to the root cause, the chances of you resolving the underlying symptom is small, and you may be lucky, but you're not gonna. It's really not directed in true science and customized based on your underlying imbalances.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because so many of these tests that people are getting, they've got their healthy parameter range on the, desired window there, but that parameter is based off an average population that's not a healthy population to begin with. So it's probably the furthest thing from optimal. Do you know of any good graphs that show what optimal is so that people can measure against that, as opposed to just the printout they get from their LabCorp or Quest Diagnostic Center?
Well, I don't necessarily know of a graph. I know the research that I've done and all the years of experience. I have memorized all of the optimal ranges, and I actually have a printout or a downloadable PDF of all of the thyroid. I tell you that there's 12 markers that make up a complete thyroid panel. And I also have the optimal ranges with that, which I can certainly make available to your viewers. But I don't know of any kind of other resource that has it all put together that I'm aware of that gives you all the optimal ranges. But I think it's important too to understand that you have to know which test to order to kind of put everything together and understand patterns. So it's not just about for example, many people with low thyroid and who have insulin resistance issues have a fatty liver pattern. And that means that their liver cells are dying off and they're turning into fat. Now, you can diagnose that by looking at the laboratory ranges if they're outside of the laboratory ranges. But there's a pattern, like AST and ALT are those liver enzymes, and they should be between 10 and 19. And the lab range is like 0 to 44. But the pattern is if those liver enzymes are above 19 and triglycerides are above 100, that's the beginning signs of this fatty liver pattern. And the crazy thing is you can even see that in ultrasound before we can see that pattern on blood. But most of the time it doesn't get diagnosed until those liver enzymes are above 40 and 50 in the outside of the lab ranges. So you have to be able to look at patterns. It's not just looking at like liver enzymes, but you got to be able to correlate different patterns.
So it goes far beyond just getting your generic annual physical and then looking for any red markers on your printout. Yeah,
exactly.
What is the typical demographic, like the patients that you're working with? What are they typically dealing with? What are they coming to you specifically for? When did they honestly know that there is an issue to begin with? Like, who is your general avatar patient demographic, I guess?
Yeah, my patient demographic is typically somewhere between 50 and 65. Now, certainly we have women on the outsides of that for sure. But I think 50 and 65 is typical. And they've all been dealing with low thyroid issues for decades. And I think they've tried every diet, just like I tried every diet. They have a diagnosis. They've been told that the reason they feel like they feel is because of their age. They say, oh, it's because of menopause. And when you get told that, when it's age or menopause, what are you going to do about that? Nothing. Like there's nothing we can do about our age and there's nothing you can do about the phase of life that you're in. So I think that most of these women are frustrated. They've been dealing with it for a long time. They haven't found anything that's worked. And so, that is when they stumble upon me and, all of the women that I've worked with, that's when they start to get excited and they start to have hope again.
With the popularity that has arisen from HRT, bioidentical hormones. I mean, it seems like I've got a conversation around that almost on a daily basis these days, whereas you didn't really hear that at all 5-10 years ago, it seems.
Yep.
It's kind of like the Wild West in certain regards, and I feel like a lot of these doctors are prescribing HRT without a comprehensive view of what downstream effects are. So when you are a menopausal woman that's going on HRT, what can they expect that to do to thyroid health and function if that conversation is not had and just tested for at the onset?
Okay, so you're right. Hormone replacement therapy right now is the wild, wild west. There are no solid guidelines, and doctors are really just trying to figure out where they start and how they manipulate this. And my biggest beef with women going on hormone replacement therapy is that they're not tested. They are not tested thoroughly to understand what is like urine, blood, and saliva, to understand free fraction form, what's at the tissue level, what's floating in the blood, and how is the body metabolizing those hormones. So understanding full thyroid physiology is extremely important. And then once women get put on these hormone replacement therapies, are we testing to make sure that they're not metabolizing this down the wrong pathway, increasing their risk for estrogen dominant cancers? So yes, even though it's bioidentical, if they are pushing this down the 4-hydroxy or 16-hydroxy pathway, they're increasing their risk for estrogen dominant cancers. The other thing that's really important is, understanding that women who have an autoimmune disease, they get triggered when they have these big estrogen surges or testosterone surges. It can be a trigger for autoimmunity. So we have to look at the person in front of us, understand the full aspects of their health history and where they're at, and then continuing to test them to make sure that they're on the right dosage, that they're metabolizing this properly. If they're not, how do we support them in that way is going to be very, very important. And not just sticking them on these hormones for eternity. And I see people, women who have hormones as higher than a menstruating female. I'm like, I don't think estrogen is supposed to be like 2 times higher than when we are menstruating. And then they wonder why they have a hard time losing weight. So I think that there's benefits to using hormone replacement therapy. I think that we don't have enough guidelines and understanding of how these hormones are working in the body. I always look at it like Plinko. You know the game Plinko? You might be too young. Like on The Price is Right. So they just drop it at the top. And then it kind of goes and you have no control over what the body is doing with that hormone. It's like we're going to hope for the best, but we have no idea how it's metabolizing it, how it's going to stay in the body, what it's going to do. And so it's literally just guessing and hoping for the best. And the other thing that's important is that hormones, in my opinion, are at the bottom, at the end of a metabolic pathway. So for me, I'm not saying that hormones are all bad, but what I'm saying is, why do we have low hormones in the first place? Because postmenopausal women are supposed to have a certain amount and a healthy amount of estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. If they're below a postmenopausal range, we need to ask the question why, right? So if we have low estrogen and testosterone, well, what does DHEA look like? Okay, DHEA is low. Well, why is DHEA low? Well, because the adrenal glands are not functioning well. So what else is going on at the adrenal level? Are they in constant fight or flight and have high cortisol? So all of the resources are being pushed into cortisol and not into estrogen or DHEA so that it can go into estrogen and testosterone. So understanding like why we have low hormones, because if you're over supplementing with estrogen, you're going to push DHEA down, right? Like there's so many other impacts. Hormones affect, the whole body, and they don't just affect it doesn't just affect estrogen. It affects DHEA and adrenal function and testosterone, and everything is impacted by these hormones. So really having a better understanding of how hormones work. And also if we can keep asking the question, why are these hormones so low, and can we work at a root cause level? I think that that's a better approach.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It seems that the general consensus has just moved to them being a pro, through and through, without much thought given towards any repercussions downstream, which has been frustrating for me because I'd like to take a more holistic, comprehensive approach. So of the, 50 to 65 year demographic that you're typically working with over the past 5 years, is there any idea, general thought as to what percentage of those patients have been prescribed HRT before coming to you?
If I was just to guess, I would probably say 50% of them have. And I think that the reason that they're coming to me is that they maybe same thing with thyroid hormones, right? So they felt good for a little bit and then they went back to not feeling good. And then they got on HRT and they felt good for a little bit, but now they don't feel so good. Or they got on HRT and they all fell apart. When they fall apart after getting on HRT, I know it's just they had an immune response, right? So that doctor didn't understand that estrogen and testosterone surges can cause an immune attack on the body. So I would say a good percentage of them have been on hormone replacement. And then from what I do is just do the testing. Do they do well on hormone replacement? Are they metabolizing it properly? What are their adrenal glands looking like? And making sure that they're good. Some of them are doing great. Others, I'm like, oh my God, they have you on a 16-year-old dose of estrogen. When you are 65, you probably don't need that much estrogen, and you're estrogen dominant. Your progesterone's all out of balance with your estrogen. So it's really trying to, see the patient for where they're at and then make the appropriate changes based on how they're doing and their physiology.
Totally agree. What about, I forget the name of it, but there's that popular, pig thyroid medication that's supposed to improve or, natural upregulation of thyroid function. Do you have a thought towards that at all?
Yeah, so that is Armour thyroid. And Armour thyroid is a natural, like desiccated pig thyroid, and it has T4 and T3 in it. And I would say this, I don't necessarily have any major preference to what thyroid medication a patient is on. It all depends on how their body is absorbing it and processing it. So you will find some doctors who are like, I only use Armour thyroid. But some patients don't do well on Armour thyroid, like they need more T4. So I just look at it like, okay, how is a patient doing? They already mostly come on prescription thyroid medication. Sometimes they have issues with Armour thyroid. They may have issues with Synthroid or levothyroxine. They have an underconversion issue maybe from T4 to T3, so they're not converting it properly. So it's just looking and evaluating where the person is and not getting too hung up on a specific thyroid medication. Because again, it's important that we have enough thyroid hormones, but most of the issue that they're having is from all the other underlying triggers that haven't been addressed. Now, there's other better, in my opinion, T4 hormones, which is Tyrosint, because it's super clean. Like the levothyroxine and Synthroid have cornstarch in it and some dairy in it. And, I've looked at it, but there's some rumors that it has gluten in it, but I couldn't be super clear about that. So some people just do not do well on that medication. And then Tyrosint is super clean. I think it's an MCT oil with T4 and a gel cap. So if somebody needs a T4, that's a really good option. And then other people do really well on Armour and some don't. So it's not necessarily about the thyroid medication. Sometimes it is, but not always. And usually it's the underlying triggers that are the biggest issue.
Totally. How often should someone get these comprehensive panels? It's going to be kind of case dependent based off of what manipulations you're making, but as a general rule of thumb, how frequently should someone get these comprehensive lab panels drawn to give it enough time to actually see measurable change, but not wait too long between testing?
Yeah, like I just saw a patient this morning. Her doctor sees her once a year, and she lowered her medication because she was way over medicated. She lowered her medication, and I'm like, when are you going to go back to see her? Because this is definitely not low enough because you're still in hyperthyroid. She's like, oh, I'm not due to see her for another 6 months. I'm like, oh my gosh. So definitely not a year, but that is typical. So most people get their thyroid checked once a year, regardless if they're changing or not. My patients, when I have them in care, I do their labs every 45 to 60 days because when you're treating the underlying root cause, the body heals pretty quickly. And so I should expect to see pretty significant changes within 45 to 60 days. And then we continue that pattern until, someone has reached balance and they're doing really well. And then after that, I would say every 6 months would be appropriate. That's about what I do. Every 6 months, I do a full big blood panel.
And you probably don't want to make drastic shifts into your thyroid medication based off of how you're feeling on a given day. Like you kind of want to get it dialed in, hold a steady baseline, and then let that data come in 45, 60 days later, and then make a shift as necessary, not just, change based off of how you're feeling that day. Because I've had some patients or some clients that have done that, and I'm not their thyroid, doctor, so I'm, not prescribing them anything. But I'm like, if you're messing with anything hormone related or thyroid related, you probably don't want to shift on a regular recurring basis like that.
Yeah, I had a patient just the other day doing that. And I said, does your doctor know that you're doing this? Like one day you take this and the next day, if you don't feel like it, you don't take that. She goes, yeah, she told me to self-medicate because my symptoms are so up and down. So it is better to have consistent amount of thyroid hormone in the body so that your body is maintaining the metabolic rate. And it's almost always that if you're having these big fluctuations in the way that you feel, it's probably your blood sugar and not your thyroid. And so then they're increasing and decreasing their thyroid medication. And that's not how the body typically works.
Yeah, because there's like a lag time to everything. And if you don't give your body the adequate time to acclimate to whatever changes you're making, then you're making feedback that's based off of inputs that were taking place, weeks or months prior, which is just... it's like shooting in the dark. It's not going to really work out well for you.
That's right. The only thing that, changes pretty quickly is your blood sugar, right? Like your blood sugar can go up and down pretty quickly. But like when you're dealing with Hashimoto's, I can tell. I have Hashimoto's. I can tell when I kind of am over where I should be because my heart rate will speed up or I'll have like a heart palpitation. So to me, that means the immune system just attacked the thyroid. And I just got a little shot of, thyroid hormones because those thyroid cells died. So I take a step back and I say, okay, how's my blood sugar? How's my stress level? Do I feel like I have some kind of infection? Like, where am I at? And then, but a lot of people take that as like, oh, I need to decrease my meds right now. But that it already happened. And it's not because they're usually over medicated. It's because they just, ate something, or did you get into gluten or dairy or some kind of food sensitivity or some trigger that caused your immune system to attack the thyroid, and you're going to feel like you're over medicated, but it shouldn't last that long. And you should go back and look at the underlying trigger.
What do you do for stress? Would you consider yourself a stressed person in general?
I don't have the personality of being stressed, but I will tell you, I am running a business. I've got 2 kids. I've got a marriage. I have a farm, a regenerative farm. I'm always doing something, writing a book, developing an app. I always overcommit. So do I stress my body out? Absolutely. So, but you have to balance that so that you're not stuck in this sympathetic overdrive. So for me, I'm always out with my animals whenever I can. That actually will put you more into a parasympathetic state. I'm always walking in nature. I meditate almost every single day for at least an hour. I get into the sauna, and I eat really well. So I try to manage that stress. And I can always tell, like when I'm tipping over into that distress instead of being in eustress, I always just take a break, and I have everybody around me to support me in that way. So I've created that environment. So when I need a break, I'm like, I'm out. I am just taking a few hours off or a day off, and I just need to recuperate. I prioritize sleep. I was just telling my husband, he woke up today and he's like, God, I really slept well last night. I said, me too. I'm like, I've been sleeping for 9 hours a night, which is very unusual. And he goes, you're recovering. It's okay. I'm like, okay, you're right. You're right. That's okay for me to sleep for 9 hours a night. So I really try to manage the stress that I pile on. And what am I going to do to kind of counterbalance that so that I'm also supporting parasympathetic?
Yeah, it's a fine dance to make for sure, because I'm in the same boat. Like, I've got my nutrition's dialed in, my training's optimized.
Yep.
But I just bring so much to my plate. I mean, I own multiple businesses. I've got clients. It's just like, I love everything I do too. And that makes it even trickier, because when you love everything you do, you just keep adding to it. I'm burning my candle at all ends without a doubt, but I don't know, that's my Achilles heel for sure, is just being stressed. It's always a good stressed mentally, but like physiologically, it probably still wears on me just the same.
Yeah, I think it's, for me, I have a huge mission, which is to truly change the face of healthcare. And I really emphasize women's health because I think women have the biggest circle of influence. And so when you have that huge mission, probably like you too, there's so many opportunities. There's so many ways that people can be helped. And so in order to do that at maximum productivity, your health has to be your number one priority. And I find that business owners and moms, a lot of times we aren't prioritizing our health. And so all of our efforts and our productivity and our brain function really suffers. And so I made a commitment a long time ago that my health was always going to be my number one priority. And so that is, how I can prioritize eating, working out. I don't start my day until 10 o'clock. I said, nobody talk business to me until after 10 o'clock. Why? Because I write my goals in the morning. I have a good breakfast. I work out. I go talk to my animals. I go harvest stuff in the garden. And then at 10 o'clock, I'm ready to go. And then I'm usually done by 7 o'clock p.m., which I also go walk outside and do all of those things. But you have to set your boundaries and you have to set your priorities. And I know for sure that if your health isn't your number one priority, whatever it is that you do, whether you're an entrepreneur and you're crazy like us, or you're a crazy like us mom, or whatever it is that you do, if your health isn't your number one priority, everything else suffers.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Completely agree. I got another question for you. This one's definitely a tangent. But what type of regenerative farm are you operating there?
Well, we decided in 2021 that we were going to start a regenerative farm. My husband really just wanted to be on land. And then I was like, okay, let's go. And so, for us, understanding and knowing that there's a saying, you are what you eat, but it goes way deeper because you are what you eat eats. And so the more that we are understanding what they're doing to the animals that we're eating. And I just remember in COVID, like reading something, seeing an article or some post on Facebook or Instagram where the slaughterhouses, the feedlots were killing hundreds of cows. And I'm like, that's weird. Why would they kill all of those cows? Why don't they just wait a couple months and then process them when the processors open again? Like, that made no sense to me. But the more that I dug into that story is that these cows are diabetic. They literally would not have lived that long, and they would have these cows like dying and they wouldn't have any control over that. So they went ahead and just killed all of those cows. And I was like, oh, I knew that cows that ate grains were not great. And I knew it was better if it was grass fed because of the omegas, right? The omega 3s, 9s, 6s, that balance. But I didn't realize that those cows were diabetic. And if you're eating cows that are diabetic, it cannot be good for you. You eating like sick animals with chronic degenerative disease. And then learning more about all the pesticides and all the things that they put. So I'm like, okay, if we're going to move to land, great, I'm going to start a regenerative farm. And my husband's like, oh my God, what are we going to do? So I have cows. All of our animals are heritage breeds, so they take longer to grow and they have been less genetically modified. They're not really genetically modified, but less hybridized. And when you learn that the turkeys that we are eating can't even procreate and they're artificially inseminated because it makes a bigger breast and there's more meat, you're like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. So we have heritage turkeys, heritage chickens, Highland cows. We have sheep and pigs and a huge garden. So we have all of that. I'm in the process of maybe doing bees and goats, but I got to hire a ranch manager to help me because I can't do all of that.
No, this is super cool because we have chickens, we raise lamb, and I'm doing it all rotational grazing as well. So we're speaking the same language here. I had
we
Will
could
Harris
probably
on the
talk
podcast
for another hour. Go ahead.
Yeah, totally. I had Will Harris on the podcast. I went and did a seminar at his ranch in Georgia. That was awesome. But yeah, I mean, we got bees. Like I'm just going super deep into this as well. We actually had a guy over this morning. I'm probably going to buy some pigs from him to raise the pigs. So yeah, I mean, we could definitely talk about this for another hour because I love this.
What kind of pigs are you raising?
Right. We haven't gotten them yet. So he's got a couple different strains. I'm kind of leaning towards like the Coonies or something, but you mentioned Highland cows. How much land are y'all on that you're raising the cows on?
60 acres. So I don't have a lot of cows. I have like 6 or 7 cows. We probably can't handle much more. What I've learned, like the sheep and the goats, you can have 10 sheep or 10 goats to 1 cow. So, it's more efficient on smaller amounts of land to have sheep and goats versus cows. So we can't handle that much more cows than what we have by and letting the grass rest for at least 60 days in between when they graze. So we're trying to manage that. But I have Coonies also, and they are so great. I had old spots too, but we are getting rid of the old spots. They're just not as friendly. And I don't know. I feel like they would knock me over and eat me if I fell in the paddock with them. But the coonies, they get on your lap when they're babies, and they are just the most precious things. And we're actually processing our first kind of round of them. But, I haven't ever had their meat, but I heard the meat's great. But they're amazing, almost like dogs. They're so amazing.
Yeah, they're. I mean, I've only heard good things about that breed as well. I've heard really good things about the Highland cows. They're like super hardy, from what I've read up on. Like, I've never raised the cows. My uncle did way back in the day, so I'm excited to get back into it. But the lamb that we raised were super easy. I mean, they were the easiest by far, and we kept them for an additional year, so they kind of were more so mutton than lamb. But they had more fat on them. That was delicious. It was just super breezy, and I feel like the more significance and importance you put on the foods you eat, the more by default you care about what that animal consumed, and it just makes sense that you raise them if possible. I mean, I do a lot of hunting too, but knowing your local rancher, if you're not raising them yourself, just like becoming more connected with the foods you eat, so that circle of life is more complete and transparent, I think is just incredibly important.
It is, and I think from an energetic perspective, these animals are, treated with love every single day, and they have great, amazing food, and they're in a no stress whatsoever environment. I think that also really infiltrates the food that we're eating.
100%. What state are you located in?
Texas. Oh, and so Highlands, they told me Highlands don't do that great with the heat, but mine do really well. But they do have access to water, and they literally sit in the pond all day long whenever it's hot. But they do really well.
Well, I'm in Arkansas, so I mean, pretty similar climate to Texas. So yeah, I'm kind of leaning towards Highlands as our cows for sure.
Oh, they're so sweet. They let me brush them, and they're really friendly. I have one that's kind of bitchy, but all the other ones are super sweet. And we have a bull who is like, oh my, you could go sit on him and he would not care. So they're all very docile, pretty sweet animals.
Love it. Love it. Well, we could probably, like I said, talk forever on homesteading. We'll have to do a round 2 podcast dedicated to homesteading, raising your own meat. But Dr. Heather Stone, I truly appreciate the time and all the expertise on thyroid function. If there's everything I can do to help you in any way, you just let me know. Where can people go to find out more about you, dive deeper into your work, all that good stuff?
Yeah, they can go to my Facebook group called Happy, Healthy, and Lean. Every month I do a masterclass there, and that's how people would be available to get testing or even to enter into care. So that's really the only place that they can go to get more access. Now, I do have a book that's out on Amazon called The Thyroid Transformation Blueprint, so they can always get more information there.
Awesome. Well, I'll link out, make it easy for people to find you for sure.
Okay, thanks for having me on. It was great.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Take care.